Hey Carlos, how are you?
Hi, Mauricio. How are you doing? It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for the call. Carlos, let's talk about Brazil elections. Can we review the aftermath of the first round presidential election? Results came narrower than expected by polls, and Congress is going to be held by a more center right majority bias. What to expect from now to ballotage day, and what would be the main focus next Congress should be working on?
Yeah. Okay. Well, you're right. I mean, the first round, the numbers came in much narrower than I think anyone expected. Looking at the polls, I think basically maybe one or two were forecasting what happened. Most of them were showing a gap much wider between Lula and Bolsonaro. I think there are a few implications of this. First of all, differently from what some people thought, the election is not decided. Right, there is a chance, a real chance that Bolsonaro might turn things around, and I think that alone might might push Lula towards a more moderate agenda and a more moderate speech, and even maybe he will finally talk about his economic plans for his government, right? Which he has avoided doing. Maybe he will even suggest who his finance minister might be, which again he has avoided doing. So the fact that the elections are, that it's going to be a real fight in the second round, that might push Lula more towards the center. I think you mentioned also about Congress, and I think it's pretty important. Maybe that was the most positive news out of the first round is the fact that Congress, that was already kind of a center right Congress, moved it even a little bit more to the right after the first round. So even if Lula ends up winning, and the thing is for him to try to do two radical economic policies or approve radical legislation will be very, very difficult with a Congress that is center to center right. Um, so it's going to be a very tough fight from now to October 30th, when is the second round. But I think there is a few positives already that we can take from the first round, which I just mentioned.
And given that you mentioned the economic agenda, I know there's no current agenda on Lula's side, but uh, what do you think could be the main differences between the two candidates? And how much of each agenda is doable considering the economic scenario and the Congress balance?
Okay. Yeah, I think, on the Bolsonaro side, given that he's the sitting president, I wouldn't expect anything different than what he has done and his economic team has done over the past 4 years, right? There is a good chance that Paulo Guedes, which is the current finance minister, stays in place. It has been a liberal agenda. We may argue that some of the things they wanted to do, they couldn't do because of the pandemics, but in general was a liberal agenda with several projects being auctioned to private investors, with a big privatization taking place in the last year of the government. I would expect to see the same type of projects being auctioned to private investors, more privatization, a reform agenda to move forward. I think this we can all bet on that taking place, and if Bolsonaro is reelected. On the Lula side, I think maybe the most important thing is in the short term, everybody's hoping to see him making an announcement of a more responsible fiscal agenda, which I believe will happen. I think Lula has no interest in coming up with an agenda that doesn't take into account Brazil's fiscal situation, which is better than anyone expected maybe a couple of years ago, but it's not good, right? So I think Lula will respect the fact that we have fiscal limitations, but there are very few really said by Lula in terms of what he plans to do in the different areas. So I think at this point, the fact that he probably is going to be fiscally responsible is the most important point.
Great. And today, Brazil assets seem trading in an extremely low valuation range. And I mean by that a real a nominal exchange rate, stock multiples, and pretty high interest rates. The price scenario implies a low growth or and profitability for longer, despite central bank could be the first to do the expected pivot. What is your view on that?
Yeah, so we have been arguing for some time that Brazil is trading at relatively cheap valuations. So when you look at 12-month PEs, we are trading between 1 and 2 standard deviations below average. If you look at the premium to hold equities in Brazil, it is today implying almost 2 standard deviations above average. So, and this is with very high interest rates. So what I think will happen is once elections are behind us, and we have we have better visibility on both candidates or the new present political economic agenda, which we know for Bolsonaro, but we still don't know for Lula. And that elections being behind us will be important too, because there are all these talks about not respecting their election results, which I think it's not the case, but this has been concerning the markets. So I think once it's behind us, part of this electoral and political risk that is implied in the long term real interest rates will come down, will decline, and this will create room for equity prices to continue to move higher, right? So yeah, I think it's cheap. I think there's a lot of political electoral risk priced in, and I think this is going to subside towards the end of the year, and that should cause markets to move higher.
Thank you, Carlos. And just to summarize, you're heading the equity research team today, and with that broad scope, you can make both top-down and bottom-up analysis of Brazil's sectors and companies. What are the top picks, any safe play name, and some opportunistic calls you see in the market today?
Okay. Yeah. So because we are a little more optimistic about markets performance, even if even whoever wins, Lula, Bolsonaro, as I said, I think the markets are moving up anyway, just with long term or electoral risks being removed. We have increased our exposure to financial services. So we have Itaú in our portfolio, and we have Brazil Stock Exchange B3, which we just added. We have exposure to retail and consumption names. We like Lojas Renner, Arezzo, and beer company Ambev. So we have a package or a group of consumption companies in the portfolio that I think will benefit from strong economic activity and falling inflation. We also have exposure to home builders, and I think again with rates having been at very high levels and expectations that they are going to move lower, I think home builders may do well. We have Cirela in our portfolio. I have one call that is more like a political call, which is Sabesp, the water and sewage company in São Paulo, because we are very confident that the outcome of the elections in São Paulo will be positive for Sabesp. Right. So these are some of the names that are, by the way, in infrastructure and capital goods. We like a couple names. We think these stocks tend to benefit from falling long-term rates. So we have both railroad operator Rumo and car rental company Localiza in the portfolio. So I think this gives us the type of exposure we would like to have at this point in the race. We don't have any federally owned, state-owned companies in the portfolio like Petrobras and Banco do Brasil, because we think these stocks might be impacted in very different ways depending on who wins on the second round. So we are avoiding that risk for now. So I think that's what we have in the portfolio today. That's how we're positioned, and I think it makes sense for the second round.
Great. Thank you, Carlos, for the call. Talk to you soon.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye.